Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today's Tuesday, December 14th, 2021. Tonight's format, if you're new to these, is an open forum. So that's anybody that's a current alumni parent. We also invite you or encourage you to invite extended family and friends to these. These can also be appropriate for a sibling. If you want to ask questions about how to kind of deal with family and friends and siblings, those are welcome. If you want to ask a question that you're getting asked, feel free to ask that as if you are a sibling or a family member, and I'll do my best to answer it. And you can compare your answers to mine. You're also welcome, if you're an extended family and friend, to submit questions at any time. We have a handful of pre-submitted questions, so I'll get to those first, and then we'll launch into or move over into any questions that are coming in live. Becky, who's moderating for me this evening, will collect questions and pass them on to me when there's a time in the broadcast. So let me begin with the first pre-submitted question. All right. Let me see if I can find it. Let me think it went away, Becky. So I'll read this. The first one I think said, okay, we'll edit all that out when we do the podcast. First question reads, what are maybe the top 3 or so biggest areas for growth, particularly girls, when they come out of wilderness therapy? I know it's a broad question, but maybe I'd appreciate your thoughts. Background. My daughter is 16, has borderline traits, and has lots of deep-seated issues. So maybe areas of growth you see with girls with similar traits. The thing that makes wilderness therapy unique is not just the fact that it's outdoors. I mean, that gets a lot of the attention. That's what you think about it and see first, but it's really about these small group living circumstances and the staff that are with them for 8 days. I cannot overstate the difference in wilderness therapy compared to other treatment programs where you have staff. I'm going to say this clearly and slowly because it's so unique and deserves attention. Staff stay on for 8-day shifts. And I'm not just talking about 8 days in a row of 8 hours. I'm talking about 24 hours a day for 8 days. And so with that, you get a really, really seamless transition or a seamless treatment plan from the staff. So I'll just start with that. So they also experience, because all of these folks in the group, the other peers and the staff aren't you, there's a huge advantage, right? You're not tied into, you're not hooked into, you're not triggered by, and they, of course, on the other side, are not tied into or triggered by each other's emotional states as much as they are in the family. So there's distance, there's differentiation. Similarly, when you drop a child off at a soccer game or a baseball or a softball game, and you leave them with the coach can get away with things, can say things, can do things that you can't do. So that first distance is the first impact. And so with that impact, you're lowering the central nervous system's response or kind of its readiness. You're lowering the charge in the nervous system, and so they become much more open to lessons. With borderline specifically, an environment that is immersive, you get the kind of feedback, you get the kind of experience where the person starts to replicate their old patterns, and that's when the therapy really begins. I remember when I was first at wilderness therapy and clients were coming into the program, and it was hard because for the first 3 or 4 weeks, sometimes even going a little farther, they were showing their old patterns, and I'd be describing those on the phone, on the weekly phone call to the parents. And they're saying, we know that. Well, we've seen that behavior before because that's what happens at home. So they recreate the circumstances, the situations, the relationships in our setting, and then with that milieu that I just described with the staff and the students, they're able to respond in different kinds of ways. Borderline features are they are kind of primarily, the idea is kind of a push pull, right? I don't want you to leave me, but at the same time they create obstacles and barriers in divisions between themselves and others. It's as if they're trying to beat people to the punch. They expect to be rejected. They and then they'll translate all of the rejection that people give into, you don't love me, you don't care about me. That's the story. The story of a borderline is, the game with a borderline, the process with a borderline is you lose, and you can't win, but you can only choose how to lose. So you have to surrender immediately. So you can engineer this peer milieu where everybody's on board with losing. Everybody's not trying to win. That's really essential in treatment planning. It's really essential in parenting. So they start to have a different experience because you're distant. This is a family intervention. Because you're distant and detached, primarily communicating through letters, you're able to think and watch and observe the dynamics with some distance. You're encouraged to be really intentional, not knee jerk about your reaction. So it's beginning to repair attachment wounding, attachment pathology, if you will, beginning to give the child an experience of stability, of an environment that's not going to be as triggered, as reactive, as up and down as the home environment, because people with this particular pattern of behavior are very effective in getting everybody around them to run around like crazy and to react. So they're starting to experience something more stable in the process. There's definitely inherently in wilderness therapy a mindfulness component. And mindfulness is one of the primary skills taught in dialectical behavioral therapy to help borderline or people with borderline traits manage their distress, manage their emotions, become more regulated. So you have this in vivo experience with them where they're practicing mindfulness, they're practicing meditation, they're practicing breathing, they're practicing experience and going through their emotions. It's a tight enough structure that we can keep them safe. It's a tight enough structure that we can observe the dynamics and intervene, or at least observe and give them as feedback back to the individual. So part of what happens in wilderness therapy innately is a greater capacity to regulate because of the mindfulness, because of the setting, because of the immersive nature, because of the milieu with the staff and the students. They're not as activated. And a really important part of helping somebody to regulate is co-regulation. And that's one of the dynamics working with folks who struggle with borderline tendencies. That's one of the dynamics that's kind of ping pong back and forth, knee jerk reactivity that tends to leave them constantly dysregulated and looking for someone to vilify and blame. Borderline personality disorder, borderline features like narcissism are separate from the other diagnoses in the sense that we can think about borderline as a developmental disorder, or narcissism as a developmental disorder, meaning that when we are young, we have more borderline traits and more narcissistic traits naturally. It's normal to think in black and white terms. It's normal to struggle with self regulation, with emotional regulation. So, in that sense, you're kind of giving them a crash course in development, and you're intervening with the parents, giving them a chance to 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 step away, to give other people a chance to respond to the individual struggling with these traits in different ways, and you're learning skills and tools. So regulating is a big thing. Dialectical behavioral therapy workbooks can be especially effective in general, but in a setting like wilderness where it's not just the talk therapy or the group sessions or the individual sessions, but it's from the time that you wake up till the time you go to sleep. Everything is grist for the mill. And so one of the things that people with these features are good at is manipulating and disrupting those around them. And so when you have this kind of comprehensive, immersive treatment, you're better able to intervene throughout the day. So regulation, distress tolerance is part of what happens for folks struggling with that. Family systems intervention, changing the environment is something that's going to make a difference, but also help to maintain gains. I think the thing that I shared earlier that I want to pause and emphasize a little bit more right now is that I learned in working with borderline clients is accepting the idea that you do not get to win, you can only choose how to lose. I can't think of a better tool or skill for those around the individual to adopt than that skill, that way of thinking. And when you free yourself from the mess, right? When you free yourself from the inherently disruptive, pathological dynamic dance with somebody with borderline traits, you start to make a shift. So, like all wilderness clients, we're changing the individual's environment for when they leave wilderness therapy and move on to the next step, even if that's a therapeutic school. So you're making systemic changes that are going to make an impact and going to help to maintain gains. Obviously, relationship stability is highlighted. Self-harm, ways to manage that are highlighted. But there's also opportunities to give the individual, folks with this disorder or these traits, they're particularly poor at insight, at self-reflection. And DBT doesn't seek to teach or pass on a lot of self-reflection. Wilderness does. So not only can you have dialectical behavioral therapy training, skills training out in wilderness, but you also have the opportunity for impactful insight that you wouldn't have in any other therapeutic programming or other therapeutic programmings. So that's a few things that come out of it, that make a difference, that make an impact on the individual struggling with that. Next question, next pre-submitted question. How to talk to my teenage son about school shootings. What should I discuss with him? Any suggestions on how to guide my son for feeling safe at school? Also, how as a parent can I feel safe in sending my teen to a high school when I'm feeling fearful of a potential school shooting? How to best support our children and ourselves? I think it's like all possible trauma and stressors out there. I think in terms of helping the child, you have to sort out your own fear, your own trigger, your own dysregulation. And so going to a therapist for you, I've said this a couple of times this week to folks, when people ask, what can I do for my child? It's not even close. And there's not even a good argument. And there aren't many people that will argue against it in the first place, even with a bad argument. The number one thing you can do for your marriage, for your child, is to work on yourself. Once you have that foundation built, or at least a good way through started, then you can be helpful for the child. But like with this question, if you're still upregulated, if you're still anxious and fearful, and you come to the child, unconsciously, the child is going to feel that, and they're not going to feel like you're a safe person. They're going to have an impulse with a parent that is fearful and dysregulated. They're going to have an impulse to take care of you. They won't tell you the truth. They will present what we call fake good to you because they need to take care of you, because they need you to be okay for their survival. That's in their DNA. So you have to do your work first and foremost, and ideally doing it in a disciplined way. Now, coming back to your question more specifically, it's more about asking questions. It's more about, like Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, sitting with them in the unsolvable problem, sitting with them in their distress, their worry, their depression. What you find with attachment-based principles, which is how we operate at Evoke, is that you're able to provide an attachment experience, an experience where You take in the child's distress and anxiety, and because you have the capacity, because you've worked on it, you're able to metabolize their fear and reflect back a sense of okayness. But telling them that it's going to be okay, talking them out of it, trying to make them not feel it's ironic. It's a paradox. Trying to get them not to feel worried or upset will make them more upset. Actually will lead you to gaslighting them, to discounting, dismissing them, to not listening, to not connecting, to not having an attachment. So to be able to do what Mr. Rogers did, go again. I say this all the time because it's so accessible. The documentary and the motion picture that was made a couple of years ago, I think in the same year, Won't You Be My Neighbor and It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, those two. What you will notice with Mr. Rogers is he never overtly tried to get a child not to feel an upset feeling, anger, sadness, grief, loss, hurt, anxiety, worry. He never tried to get them to stop feeling it. He tried to give them a safe place to feel it. And then because they were allowed to feel it, they were able to move through the feeling and find their way to the other side. That might sound really oversimplified to all of you listening, but that is what we do. And that is the heroic task in parenting. It's to sit with people that we care about if we want to become a resource to them, to have done our work well enough so our needs are not in play in that moment, to take them in, which is to listen to them, to not try to make them feel better. I say to clients sometimes, try not to be helpful because that's what it will feel like to you. So try not to be helpful. But in being a safe place, a safe container, that's the technical term, a safe person, a person whose emotional systems, whose nervous system is regulated so that you can listen. I was talking to somebody recently about a child expressing suicidal thoughts as an adult child expressing suicidal thoughts. And I was explaining, you can just listen. Have you ever felt that way yourself? Your child's talking to you about it, so they feel safe enough to do that. That's a credit to you. Have you ever felt that way yourself? Can you relate to them? Can you share with them a bit of your own story? And while that's counterintuitive to almost everybody, most parents without training, that's what makes children feel safe, not alone, not scared, not crazy. So we use really what you're doing in attachment-based therapy is you're trying to reparent. Back to the borderline question and to this question about school shooting. You're trying to reparent the child, whether it's the adult child, the parent in our program, or the young adult or the adolescent child. You're trying to reparent them and give them a competing experience with previous experiences. So get support for yourself first. Make sure that you're somewhat regulated, because if you're not, nothing you do will make a difference. There are no shortcuts. You can't fake this stuff. You can only take your child, in some sense, as far as you've gone. That's true for all of us, right? I can't take you farther than I'm gone. I have to be, if I'm your therapist or your parent, I have to be bigger than you psychologically. I have to have ventured farther out to be able to hold space for you in this process. So be Mr. Rogers. Ask questions and listen. Let them lead. Normalize the fear and anxiety. Demonstrate by your very being with them, the way that you are with them, that you have sorted this out. And it's okay to say, of course, I've had some fears too. Of course, I've felt that way also. I don't feel that way now, or I'm not overwhelmed by it right now. But yes, I've had those feelings so that they don't feel alone. Thank you for the question. Somebody asks, how does one compassionately suggest a teen reach out to their old friends? Understanding good is loaded, but kids who are not struggling as much as less than the ideal peers. So how can you get somebody, how can you compassionately invite your child to go hang around with the old peers that they lost when they started getting off the path? My simple answer is you don't. Um, there's an idea in recovery that in recovery we change our playground and our playmates. And I think for most people, that especially in early recovery, that's a really critical idea. And you can offer that idea once to a client or to a child. But the fact of the matter is they kind of have to figure it out themselves. When I was a teen, 17, December 15th, I believe it was, 1985. In fact, that's really close to now, to the anniversary. When I stopped using drugs and decided that I wanted to go back on the straight and narrow path, for lack of a better word, nobody had to tell me that I couldn't hang out with my drug friends anymore. It was obvious to me. I'd already tried it a handful of times. I already tried hanging out with them and fantasizing that I could kind of separate myself from their activities, or that maybe a couple of them would follow me. In fact, and I'm not proud of this, I even told on my best friend to his parents so that they were to intervene like my parents would, in the hope that maybe I would have at least one sober, good friend that I could hang out with. It backfired on me. They didn't believe me. They believed him. He got mad at me, I think rightfully so, because it didn't come from a place of love or concern. I just wanted him with me. But on December of 1985, when drugs were going to be no longer, and alcohol was going to be no longer a part of my life, no problem. I called my friends and nobody was there to tell me to do it. The friends you choose, it's not a cause and effect in terms of you hang out with them and you will change. It's a cause and effect. It's much closer to a cause and effect that when you change, you hang out with different friends. So many of us, this leads to a bigger discussion. So many of us are upset, angry, frustrated by the relationships that we have in our lives, even our families. Some of the folks around the holidays, this is going to be particularly highlighted, of course. And so um, we want them to change. That's what we think. But really what happens is when you start to change, the people around you change. It just, you find different people around you. When I went through a big transition for myself in 2009, 10, 11, again, I didn't make choices overtly to stop hanging around certain people, but because I started to live the way that I'm talking to you guys today, because I realized that nobody else was going to save me but me, with the help of my therapist, and that I had to do the work and there were no shortcuts. When I started realizing that, when I started realizing being around people who try to control me, who give me advice, who say should all the time, wasn't working for me, it was a natural extension. My friend group, my peer group transformed as I transformed. I lost some friends. Some friends I actually thought that I would keep, and I gained some new ones that I didn't know were there. And life is a lot about, we outgrow our friends. If you guys do your work, if you all listening and watching do your work, some of you will all have already had this experience. You'll find new friends also. The old relationships, it's not that you are going to become elitist and cut people off and set obnoxious boundaries. It's that it just doesn't, the old conversations don't make sense anymore. So I don't, that's why moving a child from one group to another, from one school to another, from one setting to another without the intervention, without the therapy. That's why it really doesn't make a big difference. It will take your child a matter of minutes to connect with essentially the same peer group with the same issues that they just left. So I don't coach a lot of parents to manage peers. I coach parents to do their own work and to intervene from that place with their children, and the peers will naturally change as the child heals, as the child grows, as the child gets healthier. I hope that makes sense. Somebody asked the question, what percentage of kids go on to aftercare after wilderness? What are the determining factors for whether that is necessary or not? We have so much family work to do. It seems like it'd be better to do that with our son at home instead of having to transition to another program and being gone from the family for a longer period of time. Our therapist hasn't made a recommendation yet, but we want to see if you had what you had to say about the pros and cons of aftercare versus coming home. Great question, and the most common question that I get asked. The simple answer is about 2/3 go on to some setting other than home. In the summertime, it's probably a little bit more people come home. In the wintertime, it's probably up around 70%, 75%. Part of that is changing and evolving because we're doing better as a field, a therapeutic field at providing services and wraparound programs at home. IOPs is what they've been traditionally called, or mentors and parent coaching. So some of that is making it recommended that clients will go home after wilderness with those pieces of support in place. It's really a personal decision that's on your part. I will tell you that most parents underestimate the challenge. See, as much as I talk about family systems, as much as I talk about reuniting families and working together and everybody changing together, it is easier to do when you're separated. There is something about the presence of an other in the room or in the discussion where you lose clarity. I'll finish a parent coaching call with a client where they get as clear as they're capable of getting and as confident as they're capable of being. They hang up with me. We're clear. We know what we want. We know what to go forward. We know what the principles are that are in play. And then they get on the phone with their child, whatever setting the child is in, whatever age, adolescent, young adult, and the equation will change by 10% or 15%. The child will come up with a rebuttal, with a counterpoint, and the parents will get lost. So there's value in the separation. And when the foundation of self for both of you is built up some, when you're not as likely to be blown off your center, to be hooked and pulled and pushed around, and they too, same with them, when they don't become dysregulated and triggered by your breathing, by what you're saying, by your old patterns, when everybody's self structure gets a little bit better, and that happens more often in separation, then coming home is ready. But it's going to be harder. Even when it's good, it's going to be harder at home. Now, you're going to be ideally much, much more skilled and capable, and so are they, but it will be harder. So I tend to be really conservative about this. And I can tell you that I've talked to a lot of families who have wanted the most mainstream and kind of normal step after wilderness therapy, who have realized that they were hoping for, they were kind of planning on everything to go just perfectly or just right, kind of a fantasy. Do what you want. It's up to you. If the therapist recommends it and you don't want to follow it, you can let them know that you don't want to hear it anymore and you want them to get on board with your plan and help you plan for the next step. Don't let them bully you. Don't let them use scare tactics. Don't let them become repetitive with it. Manage your boundaries with them. That's good practice, by the way, for working with your child. I'm sure the therapists are going to love me saying dealing with them will be good practice in dealing with the child, the client. But it's true. See, if you're a therapist or a friend or a mother or father, and you're encouraging good boundaries in somebody else, the first person that ideally that person could practice with is you. So when a client sets a boundary with me, which is rare actually, because I occupy a position of authority and people are intimidated by that because they grew up in families with parents. Um, when a client can tell me something difficult, can tell me when I've upset them, hurt them, when they didn't feel heard by me or supported by me, I jump on that opportunity to thank them and to encourage it. I had a father one time saying, this goes back to the other question, says, I don't want my daughter to hang around her old boyfriend, young adult daughter. I don't want her to hang around her young adult boyfriend. He was bad news for her. And so I want to somehow get in there and stop that from happening. And I said, that doesn't really work. Ideally, I would tell her to tell you to mind your own business. And I would then encourage you to respect it, because you can't be intrusive with a child and then expect them not to have boundaries. Or excuse me, expect them to have good boundaries. I'm going to say that again. If you are intrusive, which means you use words like should and shouldn't, you're really concerned about them getting it right instead of knowing it's going to be a messy, crooked path for them. You think you know what they should do. You think you know the right thing for them, how they should live. I'm not talking about somebody using heroin. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about somebody, just their life choices. When you become intrusive, don't expect your child to have healthy boundaries, or for them to be easy at least. If we want to encourage boundaries in those that we care about, we have to be good at allowing them to set them with us. And I know it's complicated because parents have a responsibility in their children's lives up to a certain point to set the ground rules, to set the rules and the boundaries in the home. I completely support that. It's an innate responsibility for all parents. I'm not going to let my 2-year-old play with a knife. I'm not going to let my if I can do anything about it, I'm not going to make it easy for my children to use drugs and alcohol during their teens. All of that stuff. I'm gonna intervene when I need to in the ways that I can. All of that's true. You get to set boundaries, but there are a limitless number of examples where parents are intrusive. Parents are imposing themselves onto the child. They're really trying to get the child to get it right instead of get it real. And remember, the shift, I was going to say attachment based therapy. I kind of use that as an excuse because I want to tie it to a theory so it's unassailable. But the fact of the matter is, it's just life. The trick to life is creating a boundary and a relationship with your child so that they'll know what a healthy one feels like when they go out into the world. And if the game in your house is about who's right and who's in authority, if those are the games that you're playing, then when your daughter or son shows up in an abusive relationship with a partner, physically, sexually, emotionally, it makes sense, doesn't it? Because the other person is capable of using guilt and shame to keep them in their place. And that's what guilt and shame are for. They are the opposite of moral development. And guilt and shame are primarily for the authority figures to keep the subjects under control and doing it the way the authority figure thinks that it should be done. What was the question? Um, there's a lot of work to do. Listen to feedback, make your choice. Coming home, ideally, for families that are ready will be pretty intimidating. And know that there's going to be a lot of challenges. And know that the investment in a residential program of some kind for some extended period of time after wilderness is often the best way to recreate for the child, for the client, the kind of structure that they need to go out into the world. So be open about the idea. I'll end with this last story or idea. When I became a wilderness therapist in 1996, my bias was that kids should come home. I think most lay people who don't have experience in this field have the same bias. Why not? Family loves you the most. Family's important. If there's work to be done, let's do it together at home. Makes sense, right? Um, Took me about 7 months to figure out that when we'd arrived at this stage, when the family had arrived at the stage where sending the child away was the best solution, the best next step, going home wasn't after wilderness wasn't the thing that was clinically indicated. Took me about 7 months. Even in those first 6 months, I would undermine the home therapist or the educational consultant. I wouldn't be overt about it because I wanted to be not get fired, but I would definitely plant the seed that coming home was a good idea. And then I had children and parents calling me back and telling me how difficult it was and that I should, in their opinion, that they thought it'd be best if I help families make that difficult decision. So make it yourself. Don't underestimate the difficulty. The short period of time relatively to the rest of their life that these programs can the difference they can make in a relatively short period of time is a worthwhile investment. And then be open to your own blind spots. For me, it's really not about any decision you guys ask me about what should I do here, what should I do there, what's a good way to intervene with screen time, should my child go home, should I manage their peers? Every one of those questions are impossible for me to answer with integrity. The decision isn't, if you come to me for marital therapy, getting divorced isn't the solution. And staying together isn't the solution either. But becoming clear about yourself and your relationship to the other and your relationship to their issues, that's the right question. In the journey of the heroic parent, that's the paradigm shift. I start off with changing the question from what should I do, which is the wrong question, to who am I? Who are they? What's my relationship to them? And what's my relationship to their problems? Those are the correct questions to lead you where you need to go. When a psychologist raised her hand at a lecture I was giving at a conference about codependency, she raised her hand and she said to me, Brad, how could you possibly suggest to us that we tell a parent to kick their kid out of the home, their opiate addicted kid out of the home at 22, when the possible outcome is death? How could you tell us to tell a mother that? And I said to them, I would never tell a mother what to do. That's not what I do. I would help a mother cure her codependency, which is just a term for her relationship issues with herself and with the child. I would help this mother cure and heal her codependency issues, and then she would decide what to do. And I would wait with curiosity to see what that decision is. In the journey of the heroic parent, when that parent asked, should I bring cigarettes to my adult son who's asking from Canada, because they sell a brand that they don't sell in the States, should I bring them? He asked me very respectfully, and I hate smoking, and we have a history of lung cancer in our family. I said to the parent, I said, I can't even ask the question of what you should do, because that's the problem, folks. You're operating when you're asking should. And I want to be kind to you because it slips out of my mouth and mine sometimes too. So there's no shame in it. But the process is when you're thinking in terms of what should I and shouldn't I do, you're in the problem. So you drop down to a deeper level of consciousness. And I said to this parent about the cigarettes, I said, I could imagine you showing up with a pack of cigarettes, handing it to your young adult child, and saying, I don't like smoking. You know the history. And me giving you this pack of cigarettes is saying, I'm not responsible for it. You can't smoke in the car. You can't smoke in our house, but it's your life and I can't control it. And that would be fine. I could also imagine you showing up and saying, I can't control whether you smoke, but I don't want to participate in buying and giving you cigarettes. So you're going to have to get those on your own. I'm not comfortable being party to that. So I explained to the parent, either decision is great. It's actually the same decision. When I had that mother, I've told this story, but not in a while, who decided that she would not drug test her young adult child when the child came home during the holidays for a break. The child had come home one time before and relapsed. The program almost didn't take the child back. And the parent said in a meeting that I was hosting, she said, my daughter asked me if I would test her when she was home, and I said no. And I was thinking, well, that's not what the manual says, if you will. But then the mother followed it up with something that I couldn't argue with. She said to her daughter, if I smell it or see it, I'm going to do something about it. I don't want it in my house. But if I start testing you, and I know, she said to her daughter, I know you think that'll be helpful for you, but if I start to take responsibility for your sobriety, my disease is at the greatest risk for relapse. My disease of codependency, which again is just being confused about the relationship with another person. My disease is at risk for relapse. And there's no way I could argue with this mother. So to be clear, and I think this is an important point of the entire broadcast tonight, there are no answers to the questions of what you should do. You can ask them. I won't shame you for doing it. That's the way we frame questions, the way we think. That's how we kind of start the process and the discussion in therapy. But as I've said to you already, as I'll say to you forever, I don't know what you should do. I can tell you what I've tried. Let's talk about the principles that are in play. Why would you take your child home? You know, when a parent says, I want to reward them, I would say, well, let's pick that apart a little bit. This might not be a reward. I don't want them to feel bad, like I haven't acknowledged their progress. Well, let's talk about the risks and you believing that you can control what they think and how that doesn't serve both of you in the long run. Do you see how you have to think differently? Not behave differently. You can give them the pack of cigarettes or not. That will not have anything to do with defining whether or not it's a healthy thing that you've done. Your idea about what it means to be you and what it means to be in a relationship with that person and where the psychological boundaries are, that will define the health of your choice. How much screen time? I don't know. Should you manage their friend relationships? I don't know. Should you bring them home? I don't know. But I can talk about the principles in play. And if you'll allow me to have a dialogue with you, if I can ask you questions, we can see what you're thinking, what type of thinking went into the decision for you. And that's where we intervene. Are you coming from a healthy, grounded, regulated, aware, courageous place? Or are you coming from a fearful, anxious, guilt-ridden, compromised place? Are you coming from the place that you think you can control your child's sobriety or your child's mental health recovery? Or are you coming from a place where you're clear about your values, your beliefs, your truth, and you're going to live it out this way? That's the whole work at Evoke. That's the whole work with my books, the whole work with the podcast. Everything is shifting to a deeper level of consciousness out of behaviors and shoulds and shouldn'ts. It is, I believe, what Rumi, the great poet, meant when he said, there is a field out beyond right doing and wrong doing, and I will meet you there and we will lay down in the grass together. See, morality can't happen with should and shouldn't, ironically. Should and shouldn't is a child's version of morality. The most moral people that walk on the earth don't operate from should and shouldn't, because those are the voices of other people in our brain. I don't know what your religious belief system is, but my idea of a higher power doesn't come with shoulds and shouldn'ts anymore. It did when I was younger, and it doesn't anymore because I stopped patterning it after my parents and the church, right? I started realizing that my job was to find my most authentic, courageous, love-based truths and to try to live those out with my children. And I'm going to say one last thing. And I know I am off topic from the question, but I want to say it. You guys have, I suspect, the youngest of the people listening that have children, that is, could be 40. Is that possible? Yeah, that's possible. Most of us are 40s, 50s. So you have 30 years left, give or take. And your life is worthy of living. And you don't demonstrate by a higher form of love by anxiously attaching to your children and making their happiness determine your happiness. Let me be clear. I have 4 children, and I love them more than I knew was possible to love someone. And because of my background, which is a lot like your background, I had to learn to love them in a much more capable way than I was taught. I had to learn that the idea that I was taught about boundaries was intrusive, was abusive, actually. Not abusive in the sense that you would think about physical or sexual abuse, but it was still mistreating them. I want to tell you guys a story. I'm sorry for the detour, but it's important. I was working with a parent recently, and I'm going to change some of the circumstances just a bit. A parent told me about their child, about their son. And their son has struggled with mental health issues, serious mental health issues in his 20s. And these parents are doing their work, have done a tremendous amount of work. And their son got a new job, and somebody came to them who had just hired their son and was lathering their son with praise about how gifted he is, about what an asset he is, what a steal hiring him was. And they just sat quietly and they thought to themselves, I'm happy for my son. We're happy for our son. They didn't get too high about it. They thought to themselves, maybe for today. Somebody else was actually there with them. A good friend, a close family friend was there with them. And after that discussion, the close family friend was, wow, aren't you incredibly just bursting with pride? And they said, not really. It's not our life. It's our son's life. We're happy for him. We're happy for the company because they're right about him. He does have those talents. But they said pride feels too much like it's about us. A couple of days later, something really dangerous happened. The young adult man, got in a car accident, and he had been drinking and was arrested. And son reached out a couple of days later after this first story, and the parents were as cool and level as they were during the praise. And they said, the son was saying, what should I do? I'm feeling like maybe I put everything at risk. I finally got my dream job. Everything was going great. And they said, look, you might have some consequences from this, and you'll kind of have to figure that out, but don't go to shame. You don't have to throw it all in the garbage. And they were sharing again with their close friend, the same friend who had heard the praise story, this second story. And the friend was like, oh my gosh, that's horrible news. And they said, it's a part of the journey of him figuring himself out. And I'm hearing this story third hand, and I'm thinking, what a remarkable example of what it means to love somebody in a deeper and a more profound way than we were taught and was modeled for us. Do you see the detachment the parents had with their son from the success and the failure? I thought about Bob Dylan, that story I told and that I wrote about in my second book, where Dylan was asked about his son Jacob's #1 album, if he was proud of his son, and Bob Dylan said, it's irrelevant to me. That's what love sounds like, actually. Real, deep, abiding, consistent love. That's what healthy attachment sounds like. A great, great podcast. Invisibilia, July 1st, 2016. I think it's season 2. And the title of the podcast is The Problem with the Solution. Illustrates very well that anxious attachment can look like over-loving, over-involved. I would do anything for you. I'll always be there for you. I'll drop anything. That it has the exact same effect on a child's developing brain as the child that is being criticized, or where the parent is expressing anger. The same fight or flight part of the brain is activated when the parent is anxiously attached, expressing effusive love and praise. Actually, not that effusive. Probably like a lot of us want to when our children are young, before we get some training, before we go through this stuff. So the brain perceives that just as much of a threat to their well-being as the criticism. So Evoke therapy programs, Dr. Brad Reedy's approach at Evoke, is about helping parents to drop down to this new level of awareness, this new level of consciousness, this new capacity to love, to destroy the myths of that the culture teaches. It's the same that we teach at Al-Anon and recovery programs, that so much of what we've been taught in programming, so much of what's out there in the culture is nonsense. Even some self-help writers that can be really popular can sometimes reinforce these toxic ideas. Brene Brown talks about in the TED Talk that made her famous, that guilt is a good thing associated with mental health, and she's just wrong. But she can't get out of it. Even a great researcher and a great storyteller like Brene Brown, she couldn't not imagine a world where somebody could be motivated by something other than guilt. All right. I know I went really sideways with those questions. So I'll go to the next question, and then we're gonna actually we're gonna have to wrap up and save these for the next broadcast. I'll ask one more question because I went off on my own tangents. The last question is, how does one respect their child's privacy about being at the wilderness program while at the same time not avoiding questions about where they are? I'm having a hard time navigating this. Like, why is he missing from the family pics? You know, we are a school. We I don't know if we're the only ones still, but we were the first one to be accredited as a school. So you can just say he's off at a leadership school. Tell the truth if you want and be vague. You don't owe anybody in your life an explanation. And if those people love you, they're not going to ask you to be there for them. They're going to be there for you. And then ask yourself, is it the child's shame I'm protecting or mine? Maybe you can talk to the child about it. Ask the child what they want you to say. More often when this question has been raised to me on my own caseload, not in these broadcasts, because I can't really follow up with you all, but with my own caseload, more often the child is pretty okay with a lot of the truth being told. You know, this is part of the mental health stigma. What I have found more often than not is when we tell a little bit of our truth, we don't have to tell everybody anything. You don't owe it to tell anybody anything. But when people start to tell their close circles some of the truth of what's going on, everybody feels better. And you'll be surprised to hear that your next door neighbor has a similar issue with a brother or a sister. You'll be surprised to hear that somebody in your neighborhood also had a child at our program. You'll be surprised that at work that people are starting to come out of the woodwork when they're struggling with mental health issues or addiction issues. I'm pretty open about it. My family's pretty open about it because there's really no shame. I don't tell everybody everything, but we all go to therapy. We all struggle. We're all a mess. See, we're all on the mental health continuum. It's not there's not two piles out there of healthy people and unhealthy people. It's a continuum, and we're all on it somewhere. Everybody listening to me has narcissistic traits, period. Everybody listening to me has borderline traits, period. Everybody listening to me self-medicates too much, period. And on and on and on. So do your work so you know who you're protecting. Talk to your child. Be vague. You don't owe people an explanation. Just like all the questions tonight, I support whatever you do. And if you do it from a more healed and a more evolved place, it will just be better. All right. I know I rambled on a lot about my own tangents tonight, but you were inspiring me. The Journey of the Heroic Parent and the Audacity to Be You are on Amazon and Audible. So you can go there. If you get the Journey of the Heroic Parent, use the Evoke link under the paperback button, because those are from us. That's the best place to get it. And the Audacity to Be You, I did the audiobook in my own voice. I read it. For support groups, 2 nights from tonight, December 16th, for current wilderness families and alumni. We have an alumni-only meeting at the end of the month, as we do now every month, December 28th at 6:30 p.m. If you're an intensives alumni, December 14th. Actually, that's right now. So you already had it tonight. I'll also be speaking on Facebook Live for the group Other Parents Like Me, a brand new group that's launching in January. So if you want to listen in Thursday night, go to Facebook and search Other Parents Like Me, and then like and follow them there. And then you can see the links there. You can also go to my Facebook or Evoke's Facebook. Contact Malia at evoketherapy.com for more information about how to attend our online parent support groups that we have every week. If you want to do a deep dive in your own work, the best thing that you can do for yourself that I know of is to start it off or highlight it with a personal intensive. January 12th through 16th is our next in-person intensive. We also do them online for people that can't travel, people that have scheduling issues. They're also a lot less expensive online. January 28th through 30th. This is family of origin work and understanding how our family of origin, how our own history is contributing to the dynamics in our lives right now. Email intensives at evoketherapy.com. Actually, Becky, who's our moderator this evening, is the one who will respond to you and reach out. We have parent coaches, attachment-based parent coaches at Evoke. They can be for your child, for you. It can be working on any issue therapeutically that you want to, outside of a few acute issues that wouldn't be safe. We could do it virtually or over the phone. We have pursuits and adventure trips for families and young adults. We ask all current families to go to 6 12-step support groups. It's free. There's not a lot in the field of therapy that's free. These are free, and we ask you to try out 6. Any combination of Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, or Adult Children. You can go to their websites, and they actually have online offerings now that have been increased in frequency since the pandemic. RefugeRecovery.org or NAMI.org are also great places to get resources, education, classes that are free in your local community. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast platform. Just go to your favorite platform and search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast, or go to soundcloud.com. You can find Evoke and myself on Twitter and Instagram using the handles at Evoke Therapy and at Dr. Brad Reedy. Evoke Intensives are on Instagram using the handle @Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, our blog has wonderful new content each week. I'll be talking to you it's actually tomorrow night. That says December 16th, but it should say December 15th. So tomorrow night, 6:30. I haven't talked about this issue for a long time. Part of it, I've never talked about it on these broadcasts. I'm going to be talking about couples work. Not so much co-parenting, but more the marriage and the couple itself. And I'm also going to be talking about intimacy and betrayal and the dynamics that are often involved in those issues. So tomorrow evening, December 15th, 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. And then I'm going to have the week off before the Christmas holiday. I'll be back on December 28th after that, where we'll finish with a Q&A. All right, folks, thank you for joining me. I hope this has been helpful for you. I hope it's a helpful point of contact. For and on behalf of the people that love you, thank you for being willing to attend and do your work. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.